So my name is Jim Harper, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Sond Health, and I appreciate the context of the previous speaker, giving you a vision for ways that voice assistants can really become meaningful clinical assistants. And what I want to describe for you in the next few minutes is a different dimension that's quite a bit different from the typical content-related speech technology that we're used to thinking about, and to describe ways that voice assistants and voice technology may provide the foundation for what I like to think of as a 21st century thermometer. And I think when we're in this space, at the intersection between technology and healthcare, it's useful to remember that we have a constructive tension. We have a tension between the Silicon Valley startup mentality of technology. We're going to run fast and break things. And on the other hand, we have many years telling us that in medicine it's important to first do no harm. So how do we think about applying this technology in ways that are going to guide clinical decisions that may have risks involved? And so I think it's useful to learn from the history of similar tools. And in this case, it's the clinical thermometer. So the thermometer, Daniel Fahrenheit went to Amsterdam in 1717, met a physician named Boerhaave. They immediately realized this could be valuable for measuring what they knew to be differences in temperature in individuals that are predictive of illness and being sick. But it was 130 years of resistance in the community, of lack of evidence, that kept it from being used in the population. It wasn't until 1851 that there was a physician in Germany, his name was Wunderlich, and for the time, you have to think about 1851, he published a definitive paper that included data from over 100,000 patients, over 1 million data points, and definitively showed that deviation from a population norm was predictive of health outcomes. Low-grade fever didn't really cause much alarm, but once you went above or below a certain deviation, you may need to deal with hypothermia and infection in a much more acute way. And so I would argue that the clinical thermometer has been one of the most valuable preventative medicine tools that we've had for the past 150 years. And it doesn't diagnose anything. When we think about technologies and digital, a lot of the pressure is to be highly sensitive and specific. And while I think voice has the potential to do that, and I'll show you some of the reasons why, even before that, just the ability to have a thermometer-like measurement for the functions of the systems that produce speech gives us a new insight and a new way to engage and reduce friction from healthcare. So we're all gathered because we believe in the power of AI and machine learning and speech to give us great insight. And I think a lot of that comes from decades of history focused on what we are saying, understanding that, capturing that, and automating a range of tasks, most of them today still relatively routine. Huge market potential. But for us, what we see is what happens below that. What else is conveyed? These systems are designed to ignore as much as possible inter-individual variability in the acoustics of speech in service of getting higher accuracy for word transcription. So I'll highlight an example that we're all familiar with, that there's a lot more information there. It's mothers. This one happens to be mine. Her name is Mary. And if you've had a conversation with your mom, I would wager that within 3 to 5 seconds, there have been times that she will pick up and say, "Jim, you sound tired. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you coming down with a cold? You really sound stressed." What she is intuitively picking up on, we refer to as vocal biomarkers. These are objective changes in the voice that are caused by changes in the function of the key systems producing speech that we can correlate through our modeling and through the feature processing that we do with the best clinical measures of health. And so what Sond really is focused on is what we refer to as automatic health recognition. We take voice data, but now instead of looking to accurately transcribe, we look for the features that allow us to accurately predict things like depression screening results, Alzheimer's disease symptom severity, Parkinson's disease, asthma. And so the reason why that's possible is we're learning more and more with every year that voice is a powerful vital sign if we learn how to unlock it, and that diseases that affect the brain, the respiratory system, and muscle coordination broadly, when those physiological functions are impaired and impacted, it produces involuntary changes in the acoustics of speech. And in many conditions, we are seeing that those are consistent enough across a population that with enough data, you can even screen for conditions and recognize their presence with good accuracy even if you've never heard the individual speak before. So the way we do it is, you're familiar with different modes of signal processing. For health, we divide it up into 3 categories of features that we're focused on: prosody, or the rhythm and melody of speech; system features that are really capturing fine motor articulation and articulatory precision; and source features, the vocal fold dynamics, the signal-to-noise or harmonic-to-noise ratio when you're producing tone. When we do that, what we see are patterns, that things that affect muscle coordination will significantly affect system features. Things that are affecting cognitive function and emotional and behavior, we see affect the prosody much more strongly. And likewise, for conditions that are respiratory in nature, mixed with some muscle, we also see a number of features that change in source. Any individual feature is not specific enough or sensitive enough to pick up on the health conditions, but by combining them, what we can do is process the complex audio spectrogram. I've shown a couple of examples here. One on top from a healthy speaker who's counting from 1 to 10, so it's roughly 10 seconds of speech. And the speaker on the bottom is somebody that is suffering with severe levels of depression symptoms. And visually, you can pick up on things. The frequency increases from bottom to top, and so there's a lot more variation in pitch that's happening along the healthy speaker. So when I count 1, I'll increase pitch at the end naturally, whereas a depressed speaker tends to be, and this is characterized clinically, more apt to speak with less tonal variation, may speak more slowly, like I'm doing now. And those are interesting correlates, but not enough to predict. We combine on the order of 20 features, including things that are difficult, if not impossible, for humans to perceive. Millisecond timescale coordination across features turns out to reflect levels of brain coordination in ways that are becoming very, very interesting. So, as examples, we have created software, and under IRB with informed consent, we've asked individuals around the world to download software to their own smartphones, provide short voice samples, things as simple as saying pataka, pataka, pataka for 6 seconds to get articulation, hold ah vowel sound for 5 seconds, or read a short sentence, something as simple as, Alexa, what is the weather outside? And from that data, what I show here on the left is that we co-administer a PHQ-9. It's a simple 10-question questionnaire that assesses all of the symptoms of depression. It's widely validated around the world to show that a score of 10 or above on that instrument is associated with moderate to severe risk for depression. We can now build models that are device agnostic that approach 80% equal error rate at predicting depression at that level, the individuals who would score 10 or higher on the PHQ-9, just from 6 seconds of voice and without having heard them before. Now, we have still a long way to go. We're engaging. We don't roll things like this out lightly. Going back to the example of the thermometer, we're scaling the data dramatically. We're now over 15,000 individuals. We are engaged into conversations with the FDA toward doing rigorous studies that will validate this before making claims about being able to do this in the real world. Interestingly, these diseases and the potential to measure them, the diseases themselves are complex. Depression is not just one disease. It actually is experienced in very different ways by different people. No 2 individuals diagnosed with depression even have to have the same subsymptoms. So we've been looking even underneath at individual questions and correlations with those subsymptoms. And the example on the right that I show is suicidal thoughts. Question number 9 on the PHQ-9 asks, how often over the last 2 weeks have you been bothered by thoughts that you'd be better off dead? And what we see is in the subset of individuals, thankfully small, out of the first 4,000 people that volunteered, we see features, a handful of them, that vary by as much as 4-fold in magnitude only in the individuals that are reporting that they're bothered by those symptoms nearly every day, the most severe. And I think this gets at the reason why we're interested in voice, the reason why we want to push these technologies is because one of the big unmet needs is how do you find conditions? How do you interact proactively for the 50% of people who commit suicide who've never talked to anyone, who've never had a diagnosis of a mental health condition and are otherwise unreachable? So again, we're engaged in longer-term studies now around the suicidality with collaborators from Harvard, Matt Nock and others, to really dig in and understand the potential power of these technologies. And so why we think this works, I'll just kind of close. The brain and speech The production of speech involves many steps. We're understanding more and more that the distribution of where these steps are controlled in the brain is actually quite widespread throughout the anatomy of the brain. The neural circuits that control speech have crosstalk with neural circuits that are responsible for a range of cognitive functions and motor functions, including controlling speech. And when you have conditions, depression, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, mild traumatic brain injury, these are things that are impacting brain function and have crosstalk with the speech production mechanisms. And it's the reason why we believe we're seeing such interesting signals. And it's not surprising then that the patterns of changes in speech that we can detect with these features are similarly distinctive to the patterns of physiology change in the brain. So I've focused a lot on the neuroscience and the brain because those are areas where traditionally objective measures are completely lacking. A lot is self-report and clinician experience. There aren't very many good biomarkers. This is beginning to change. But we see over 30 different measurements where we look at the literature and understand voice change, where the potential to get vocal biomarkers is quite strong. We've already collected data in over half of these, and in a large fraction of those, we've demonstrated that we can create models that have better than 70% accuracy. This is our threshold for, is there enough acoustic data there to potentially have meaningful impact in distinguishing that condition? And so we, in asthma and congestive heart failure, are seeing signals that we are now collecting more data and validating very quickly. So to kind of close, what I want to leave with is the thought that the voice assistant of today that's responding reactively to what we say may be very different 3 to 5 years from now. It may have the capability, instead of waking to a keyword, to wake to something like the onset of respiratory illness or depression and respond appropriately. The challenge becomes, how do you do that in the context of security and privacy? You can't just turn this on. You have to link it to clear biometric identification. You have to understand that the communication you have has to be appropriate to the condition. And so beginning, as Amazon has done with Health Guard features, not unlike the Home Guard, in the right context, is how we see this beginning to roll out. So I would love to continue the conversation with anybody who's interested in, but I'm excited. I think the potential of voice in health is incredible, and we're hopeful. So thank you.